In the summer of 1941, an invading army cut off all land routes to one of the largest cities in the Soviet Union. 2.5 million civilians, along with the troops defending them, were suddenly sealed inside. The target was Leningrad. Hitler viewed the city as a major strategic prize, but also targeted it as the ideological birthplace of the Russian Revolution. The invading command prioritized the city's destruction over its occupation. They planned to deliberately withhold the resources required to sustain human life until the city simply ceased to exist. German and Finnish forces systematically blocked the surrounding land routes. By September 8th, the encirclement was complete. The invading army entrenched themselves and waited for hunger and the approaching winter to do the killing. The millions of people trapped inside were suddenly fighting a war against the total absence of food and warmth. This chart tracks the brutal mathematics of starvation that set in over the winter of 1941 to 1942. Factory workers saw their daily food allowance drop to roughly 250 grams of bread. For non-working residents, that number was cut in half. To stretch those failing calories, bakers mixed sawdust and other raw fillers directly into the dough to produce enough mass to distribute. As traditional food vanished, the trapped residents made extreme dietary adaptations. Families consumed their pets, boiled leather belts for trace nutrients, and scraped off wallpaper to eat the dried paste. Then came the cold. Temperatures plunged to nearly -30 degrees Celsius. Without central heating or fuel, citizens burned their own furniture and books and crawled across the ice to manually collect water. When deprived of all conventional fuel, the human body begins to consume itself. These survivors were forced into unthinkable biological compromises to delay death for one more day. Enduring a siege measured in years required the population to find ways to prevent collective psychological collapse. Ordinary civilians refused to let the city's infrastructure die. Emaciated, freezing workers kept the heavy factories running, continuing to manufacture weapons for the defense of the city, even as they starved. In the summer of 1942, surviving musicians gathered to perform Dmitri Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony live inside the city. They set up large loudspeakers and aimed them directly toward the German lines, broadcasting the live concert across the devastated landscape. That broadcast turned a piece of music into a psychological weapon. It proved to the besieging army listening in the cold, and to the starving residents themselves, that their spirit remained intact. Willpower, however, cannot replace calories indefinitely. Without a physical supply chain, the entire population would eventually succumb. Their only remaining option was a desperate supply route across the frozen surface of Lake Ladoga, the Road of Life. Navigating these convoys meant driving heavily loaded trucks over fragile ice under constant German bombardment. Vehicles routinely broke through into the freezing water. This route served a dual function. The trucks brought a tiny trickle of food into Leningrad, and on the return trip, they evacuated the most vulnerable civilians, especially children, out of the combat zone. The Road of Life could not end the suffering, but it provided the minimum threshold of supplies required to keep the society from fully collapsing. Soviet forces spent years slowly clawing back territory to open narrow land corridors. The siege was not completely lifted until January 1944, nearly 900 days after the borders closed. This chart shows the scale of the devastation. By the time the supply routes fully opened, anywhere from 800,000 to over 1 million civilians had died from starvation, cold, and bombardment. The attacking command had aimed for the complete structural and cultural erasure of Leningrad. Despite the calculated use of starvation as a weapon, the city did not fall. The survival of Leningrad stands as a record of how a civilian population responds when subjected to deliberate, weaponized deprivation. They adapted, they endured, and they survived.